shocking incident took place in Bengaluru on June 13th. A woman strangled her 3.5-year-old autistic daughter in her apartment. The woman had twins. Both the children were on the spectrum. While one had severe symptoms, the other had mild symptoms of autism. The woman strangled the toddler with severe autism out of concern about her future. After killing her, the mother turned herself in at the local police station. She even mentioned to the police that she suffers from depression. Now, this isn't an isolated case where the caregiver has killed an autistic child. It has happened in the past where the caregivers have either abandoned or killed autistic children. Why do such crimes happen? What leads parents to take such extreme measures? What is autism? What is it like to be a parent to an autistic child? Let us know more about it in today's episode with Dr. Bindya Sachi, a renowned child psychologist and founder director of All Inclusive Foundation, and Chitra Paul, who is the co-founder of All Inclusive Foundation and parent to an autistic adult. Thank you so much for doing this with us, firstly. And before we begin, Dr. Binde, can you please first help us understand what is autism? What do we mean by it before we, delve into the case and what happened?
Autism it's a neurodevelopmental condition. And when we say it's neurodevelopmental, neuro meaning it has something to do with the brain, even though we're still figuring out how exactly it affects the brain and all that. And it's a developmental condition because you identify it as early. I think there are we can diagnose it as early as 15 months of age. And then from there, the child, it's we call it a developmental condition because as the child grows, the way the autism manifests or the autism how it reveals itself changes as the child grows older. And so there are differences that you see along the development of the child, and that is also one of the reasons why we call it a developmental condition. So it's a neurodevelopmental condition. And the main areas that we talk about as being affected when a child is autistic are: one is communication, social interactions, and a third area is what we talk about: repetitive behaviors. Um, so, communication is where the child has um, difficulty communicating with people around them, and also engaging with the people around them, which is the social interaction. And the repetitive behaviors we usually talk about, where the child may be seen engaging in behaviors like ongoing flapping of hands, or rocking the body. It could be some of those, or it could also be interested, a fixed interest in a toy, for example. Like they love trains, and trains is all that they would play with. Or they love cars, and the only way they would play with cars is by arranging them in a line. So you see some kind of restrictive play behaviors, um, some kind of restrictive behaviors in general. Now, some of these behaviors that you talk about under the restrictive behaviors category are also due to some of the sensory differences that they may have. They may have difficulties with um, processing sensory stimulation that comes into their brain. They are Some children are overly stimulated by the stimuli, or they are understimulated by the stimuli. So, say for example, there is as somebody's speaking in a very regular tone, and that the child perceives it as very noisy, and the child covers the ears. So it's like overly stimulated by noise. But there are also children um, who are understimulated, and they need a lot of input auditorily for them to be stimulated enough. So, say for example, it's a quiet classroom, everybody's sitting and writing their exams or whatever. It becomes difficult for the child to be in that room because there is no input coming in through their auditory sense. And sometimes you see children making those sounds to stimulate themselves. So you may see children who are humming to themselves, talking to themselves. Now, these would be categorized under the repetitive behaviors, but they are they're being exhibited as a result of the sensory differences the children are having. So that is the restricted behavior category. Now, for the longest time, we used to have these three categories: communication, social interaction, and repetitive behaviors. Now, when you talk about communication, you see that children don't communicate the same way as your typically developing children do. They may not look into your eyes while they are talking. They may not point to things like other children would. They may not come and show you things like, how children, when they find something interesting, like, oh, I found a ball, mommy, look, a ball, they would come and show it to their caregiver, their primary caregiver. Children would share their enjoyment with the primary caregiver. So these are some of the things that we find missing in a lot of our children who may be, at risk for autism at a very young age. So these are all categorized under either communication or social interaction. And when you look into it closely, and the other thing that you also see is they are either very late to talk, or they may not use speech to communicate at all. So that is one of the biggest red flags. Most of the families who come to us with concerns, they come because their child is not talking,
Mm.
because that is something that families pick up on, because the other characteristics are probably very subtle and may not be picked up by lay eyes. But this is something, my child is not talking, the child is 2 years old, my child is not talking, is the concern that they come to a practitioner with. So delay in speech is one of the primary characteristics that we see. And so when we look at communication and social interaction, there are a lot of characteristics that may be categorized under communication or social interaction, because these two are so interconnected. We also see children who are able to communicate only for their needs. I want water, water, banana, chips. I would
One
just
word
say whatever I
communication.
need. Yeah. Or it could also be I need banana, might also be the case, but they only communicate based on what they want. So then we started looking at it and looking at the behaviors, and we realized that the behaviors that you put under the communication category and social category are not mutually exclusive. So there's a connection between them, right? So any behavior you take in communication would also be social, like eye contact. It is something that is needed for social interaction. It is something that is needed for communication. So that's when the most latest classifications that we have calls it a social communication condition, or a social communication difficulty is what they call it. So they may be able to communicate, but the social communication is what is being affected, right? So now we see any kind of definition of autism or description of autism would talk about social communication and repetitive behaviors. So these would be the two classifications that you might see, or the two categories under this classification that you might see. So that is a little bit to understand autism. It's like an introduction to autism.
And what do we mean by mild and severe autism? Because in this case, we understand that the one of the twin child had mild and the other had severe autism. What is that difference? Because here it seemed like the mom knew that the child with mild autism would be able to somehow survive, but she was extremely worried about the one who had severe.
Right,
So if you
right.
could differentiate that
See,
as well.
again, that differentiation we have come to understand is pretty subjective, right? Earlier, we used to say a child who is speaking to communicate, who is highly verbal, who can understand what is being taught in the classroom, who is intelligent enough to answer to a question that is given. So all these characteristics would probably be put in the basket of a mild autism, right? Because the child is able to do a lot of things that a typically developing child is able to do. And on the other hand, where there's a child who's not talking and who has a lot of repetitive behaviors, who has a lot of sensory difficulties, would be categorized as somebody with severe autism. Right now, this classification I would say, has become a little irrelevant, because as children grow, and we have realized that a lot of children, as they grow, even if they're not speaking, even when they're not speaking, they're able to communicate using a different mode of communication. When they start communicating using a different mode of communication, we understand how intellectually smart they are. right? And some even see that they are smarter than some of your speaking autistic children, you know. So then how do you make this classification? How do you say it's mild or severe autism? I think most of the time the perception is that when a child is not speaking, the child has a lot of sensory difficulties, the child engages in a lot of repetitive behaviors, the child is very different from a typically developing child. We consider that as a child who is severely autistic, and we think that that child's life outcomes would be much worse than a child who's speaking, or who's able to do a lot of things like a typically developing child. So I think that is where our perception of that severe and mild comes in, and also how we judge that child who we are looking at. Oh, this child may not be able to do these things, but this child looks like a typical child, so he may be able to
Might
do
be
it.
able
But
to
when
manage
you
it.
understand a lot more about these children, we realize that that is not true. So slowly, like some of us practitioners have, are moving away from using the mild and severe classification. We are looking at what is the profile of this child, and what are the things that the child is able to do, and what are the things that the child is struggling to do, is what we look at.
Also, now I would like to bring in Chitra Paul, who is a parent of an autistic adult right now. If you could tell us what is your experience, when you're parenting a neurodivergent child, how is it different? Can you tell us a bit about that also? What is it from the parents' perspective?
Thank you, first of all, Akshita, for having me here. So that's quite a lot to say in a very short span of time. First and foremost, when my son got diagnosed, I had no clue what we were getting into. We really didn't have. And most of the stories that were shared were about the savant. And I guess I didn't get so caught up in like, oh, what is going to happen? Because I was like, I had somewhere in my head assumed that my son is one of those savants. So, um, yes, it was different in many ways because even to achieve basic milestones, something like as simple as toileting, I remember struggling big time and really getting frustrated, really getting frustrated about why is this child not able to pick up something as simple as toileting, which every child picks up eventually. And till 5 or 6, it was a huge struggle. So that is one of the things. Of course, he was not somebody who was using speech to communicate. So that added another layer of difficulty, because most often we had to try to figure out why. And his only mode at that time was crying. So for everything, he would cry. So you have to really figure out from the pitch and the intensity of his crying, what is it he needs? Like, is he hungry? Does he want to use the toilet? Does he have something else? Like, it was a huge challenge. It was a huge challenge. And not much help was also around, in the sense like to help me understand my child. Of course, as things moved forward, some things got sorted out, but then other things came up. So it's always been like a roller coaster. Like, you go up and then okay, we are going to go down. And then when you're going down, you also like gradually you learn like next thing is probably going to go up. So it has been very different, but in many ways it's also been very rewarding, I would say, in the sense that uh, like as a parent, I learned to appreciate very small things, which maybe as a parent to a neurotypical child, I may not have done. So I still remember when he started, he got toilet trained. That was like, oh my God, we have achieved so much. And when he started writing, that was again another thing. And even small things, like whenever he achieves, it's like there's huge celebration there. So Yeah, so there are struggles. I don't disagree. There are struggles. I'm not saying, but there are also unique joys to the whole parenting process. So yeah.
Also, you mentioned that he also had speech impairment. Could you tell us what was the different mode of communication that you figured out while he was growing up? How did you navigate that?
So, as I said, like when he was very young, there was no mode of communication other than crying. So he would cry, or he was generally a very what do you call a baby who didn't trouble at all. That kind of a baby, like that is actually bad, is something I realized much later. Babies should trouble you in some ways, but he never trouble. Like you place him in on a chair, he will happily sit there till he's hungry, and then the crying would start. So, or if there was something else, so at that point it was just crying. And yes, I guess a little bit of pulling the hand kind of thing that did happen. But at that point, I didn't realize that this he's trying to communicate, because my own understanding of autism and all that was like very little, very minimal at that point. And gradually, of course, we started understanding that there were a lot of ways he was communicating, not just hand pulling. There was changes in the pitch of the sounds he would make, which would actually intimate us that he's maybe getting upset, or he needs a break, or it is probably like he's on the path to a meltdown. So maybe we need to do some rescue activity. So simple things, but a lot of observation is how we understood. And then, of course, by around 7 or 8, he started writing with support. But then again, that was another whole huge, I don't know what we stepped into, because we had to really figure out what we were experiencing. And even now, like though he communicates a lot through writing, but for day-to-day things, he can simply just like use his finger and say, and we have to figure out sometimes. So there's a lot of interaction in terms of question and answer. Is this what you want? Or is this what you want? And then he does. Or sometimes he still pulls our hands. And of course, the pitch of the sound, all that is still there. Like I can figure out when he moans, he makes those sounds. So when he's making a certain kind of moaning sound, I'm like, my antennae go up. I know there is something which is troubling him, and he's not kind of communicating in the regular ways to tell us. So there are a wide variety of things which he's always used, and he continues to use.
There's a
So
lot of observation and understanding of the non-verbal behavior that we see when it comes to
yes,
communicating.
yeah, yeah. I think as a parent, like not just me, every parent kind of starts observing very minutely, because it becomes a kind of a survival skill many a time. So we become very good, excellent observers, and like understanding the finer things. Yeah.
And also now, this is a question to both of you. Why do you think people in society choose to abandon such children at very young age, as soon as, probably the diagnosis comes, or maybe a few months after diagnosis? We have seen cases of before that, parents abandon it, or either they kill the children because they fear that they might not be able to live a happy life in the future after growing up. Why does that happen? If you could understand from your experiences, your interactions with parents and other stakeholders in the community. I think Dr.
India,
Binda,
you
you
want to
can
go ahead?
go first. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
I think I'll let Chitra go first and then I'll follow.
Okay. So I would squarely put the blame on society. Totally and absolutely. I don't think, like all the cases you read, you do get the understanding that the caregiver has probably done it out of being pushed to a very bad corner, or not finding support, the kind of support the parent is looking for, or being informed, having been informed wrong things, like the awareness about, like for example, this case itself, like the fact that mild and severe, so the whole understanding itself, the awareness itself is so flawed. So that also kind of creates a lot of anxiety for the caregiver, and many a times the caregiver also doesn't get support from their own family, from their spouses or their extended families. And there is also the whole thing of the caregiver, if the caregiver is a mother, the mother getting blamed for why this child is like this. And because of the whole stigma around something like a disability and specifically autism, so there's a lot that society actually throws at the caregiver, and the caregiver oftentimes doesn't get the support that he or she needs. And I guess, like many of the cases, that is what is there at the root, as the root cause, because that also affects your mental health in the long run. And yeah, I really squarely put the blame on society, because as a society, I think we are failing caregivers in many ways. So yeah, that is what I would
There's
say.
lack of resources in our society
Yeah,
to
lack of
support.
resources, lack of every which way, not just support in terms of person support, people support, financial support. In India, for example, there is hardly any financial support for a person with disability. It's very pathetic, the amounts that are given out. For the caregiver, many a time the caregiver just hides the fact that they have a child with disability, even from their workspaces or work colleagues or other people, because people could have those biases, hold those biases against them. So a lot of these factors come into place. And for a mother, for example, if they quit their jobs and they're looking after this child the whole day, there is also a pressure that comes in, that you've quit your job, you're looking after the child, but still the child is not getting cured or recovered. So that also adds to the pressure. And there is no other space for this mother or caregiver to kind of take care of themselves also. That is never, that conversation is never had, actually. So I can go on and on with this. Yeah.
I completely agree with what Chitra is saying. And I think I'll tell you, there was this instance where I had a friend of mine, a close friend of mine, who came and told me once that, like at a very later stage in life, okay, like in her 30s, or, when she comes and tells that, I just realized that I have a cousin with a disability. Like in her immediate family, there is somebody with a disability, and she had no idea. And that person is also as old as her, probably. Now, where was this cousin? Right? This cousin was hidden away. The family made it a point that the world did not know about this person. And I have a feeling that, our previous generation, we focused a lot on hiding disability because of the stigma. And we never really brought them out, is what I think is probably one of the biggest reasons why our infrastructure, our societal attitudes, nothing is ready to accept people who are different, right? Now, you go to a Western country and you're taking the public transportation, there is always some kind of a facility or accommodation made for somebody with a physical disability. We don't see that in India. How many buildings in India are accessible, are physically accessible? I'm currently trying to find a job placement for somebody with a physical disability, and one of the main problems I'm seeing is accessibility issues to the workspace. Even when people are willing to hire them and give them an opportunity and all that, I'm not able to get this person into the building, right?
So there's no
So why am I
lack of
not thinking about
skills.
it? I realized that
So yeah, it's not the lack
it
of
is
skills, but it's
awareness, it is
just
lack of
learning.
awareness, right? Yes. So, like, say for example, I'll tell you an example of my family was starting a cafe, and we designed the cafe. The cafe is built, and all that is done. And we walk into the restroom, and we realize it is not wheelchair accessible, right? And I'm thinking, why should that be? And I was really furious about that. That this the restroom in this public space is not wheelchair accessible. Why wouldn't an architect not think about that?
Yeah.
Right? So we design for able-bodied people, we design for neurotypical people, so we design for the majority, right? And these other people who we don't even know about are completely marginalized. We're not even thinking about them. So to me, I think it's very important to. So both Chitra and I are big advocates for inclusion. We're
Yeah.
huge advocates for inclusion. There are people who come and say maybe inclusion doesn't work for everyone. Probably true, but we still think that inclusion must happen, because that is the only way we can have the society open their minds to people who are different. We need to bring them in, and we need to start in schools. When we start in schools, what happens is, if I have gone to school with somebody who was different, I see somebody else later on in my life who's different, I don't think twice about it. Yeah, I went to school with
Normal
somebody
for
who was
me.
like that,
Yeah.
right? It is very normalized for you. But when you only have special schools, and all the children
Yeah.
who are different are sent to a special school, a typically developing child never learns to be around a child who's different from them. So when we push for inclusion, also, we keep telling about how important inclusion is for the typically developing children,
Hmm.
which is not accepted. I mean, that is not an argument that people want to listen to, because it's not their priority, right? But inclusion is definitely needed. For example, if Chitra's son were to go out into public park, for example, with somebody who communicates with him using the mode of communication that he uses, and people see that, and people are also allowed to interact with him with the same way of communication, for example, then that person is more likely to be open to communicating with another person who he or she might see elsewhere, right? Because this is the only way awareness will increase.
Yeah.
And this is the only way we can take out stigma. Because right now, a lot of our children and young adults and adults with autism, one of the problems that they face is that, especially if they fall into the category of mild autism, one of the challenges that they face is that they are forced to act like everybody else, right? They're forced to give eye contact when they talk. They're forced to talk to people even if they're not comfortable. They're forced to do a lot of things that typically developing people should do. And that is all because of the stigma. Because we have one way of behaving in public, and everybody is expected to behave that way. And when our children are finding it difficult to do that, we are training them to do it that way,
Yeah.
right? So we see a lot of people with autism who are talking about how traumatic that experience is for them, where they are asked to be someone else who they are not. But instead, if as a community we learn to interact with them in a way that they are accepted, or in a way that they find comfortable, things might be a lot more easier for them, right? But this can only happen with inclusion.
Yeah.
So when there are more and more people coming into the schools, when there are more and more people coming into the community, then that stigma also slowly goes away. And we see that, like, if we look at women's rights, for example, I come from a very small town, and I go back to my small town, and I know how the attitude towards women were then and how it is today. I mean, it has not improved a whole lot, but they are more accepting of a lot of things that women are doing now, because there are more and more women doing it around them, right? And that is the only way we can change this, the attitude towards disability and the stigma around it. So I think that is also one of the reasons, because our people are not familiar with, or they've not been
Yeah.
exposed enough to situations like this, where they're interacting with somebody with a disability or somebody who's neurodivergent, and hence they don't know how.
To be with us. So what I'm understanding here is that firstly, one of is that we of course have lack of resources in society, be it in terms of, let's say, financial infrastructure or even emotional support. And second thing is because we don't normalize to people that there are different people living in the society, and because we don't see them, even as a parent, to a new parent, it's very difficult to accept that, okay, my child is autistic, and that is creating a lot of problem right now. Uh,
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing that out. And again, can we understand what here, at least in this case, we see that the parent might have also have had depression, which adds another layer to parenting, especially when it comes to a neurodivergent child, when we understand that she might not have the support that she needs, and her husband was abroad. So it was technically the mother who was supposed to bring up these two twins. Can you help us understand what it would be for a parent who also is suffering from mental disease? She has depression, she's suffering from something already, and to add to it, a caregiving also adds to it. What does it do to her health? If you could tell us about that also, Dr. Bindya.
Well, let's talk about a, a new mother of a typically developing child. We know there are a lot of women who go through postpartum depression, which is not being talked about enough. I know for a fact that I have gone through it myself, and I know of friends who have gone through it, and we've all had degrees of it. I know of a friend who used to complain about how she could not stand the sight of her child, and this is a new baby that she's supposed to be caring for, right? And this is part of the depression. This is a manifestation of the depression that she's going through. Now add to it the stigma of having a child with disability and not knowing what future holds for this child,
Yeah.
not knowing how to take care of this child, not having people around you who can tell you it's probably okay, and we have seen other people who have done this, and we can help you through this. This is all but natural, right? For a parent to react that way.
Yeah.
Um, so definitely a mental health condition like depression can definitely add on to the situation. Families who come to us also, like they've never
I
diagnosed.
think, ma'am, your voice is breaking. I'm not sure if the
Can you
connection
hear me
is
now?
fine. Yeah, I can hear
Is
you.
it better? Yeah. So we've a lot of families who would come to us this time have concerns about their child, and they've come to us. And I usually ask the question before I share the news to them. Have you been elsewhere, or has anybody mentioned this term to you? Because I always am very careful about being the first person to, use that term, because it's a heavy term. It's a huge term. Like when I was part of my training program and when I used to practice in the US, um, diagnostic diagnostics was a full drawn out process. Like it was a long process. We would take an entire day just to do diagnostics. Okay. And in that entire day, the first part of the day is for doing the assessment. And the second part of the day is for meeting and helping the parent understand what this means. Right. So it's a very loaded diagnosis that we are giving them.
Mm.
It is going to just change their lives forever, right? I mean, for parents who have so many hopes and dreams about this new baby that they have, and this one word can change it all. So we need to be very careful, very cautious about what we are going to be telling them. On the other hand, when I came to India, and this is about 12 years ago, okay, in India, and I don't know what the situation is like now. I think it's definitely better than what it used to be. Then I've had families who would come and cry to me and tell me that the doctor who told us, like, they gave us this question, questionnaire with 20 questions, and we just, picked whatever to for the best of our knowledge. And they looked at it and they said, your child has autism. Move on with my next client waited. As in, like they would diagnose a fever or a cold.
Mm. You have this, and this is
Not giving.
autism.
I mean, there is no debriefing. There is no support for this family as they grieve through it. Because some
Yeah.
families, they grieve, they go through a grieving period once they get this diagnosis. So all families react to it differently, right? So this is one thing that I've noticed, and I would spend so much time with this family. I would spend hours with this family trying to help them understand. Now you can ask me questions. I'll help you
Mm.
understand that. because a lot of them go to Google, and then,
Yeah.
Google doesn't.
I think, ma'am, you paused for us. Not sure if it's my connection. Hi, I think, ma'am, I think I lost my connection. I'm so
Yeah,
sorry. Yeah,
No
you're,
it's okay.
issues.
Make sure the recording. I think I heard the recording has
yeah, yeah,
restarted because
the
the recording
recording had
had ended.
started. Yeah, yeah, it won't
Yeah,
stop.
right, right.
I hope, yeah, you were talking about your experience in the clinic over here, that they give you
Right.
20
So when
questionnaires.
families come to me, one thing is, that they have not understood what autism is, and I help them to understand that. Second thing I am usually asked is, um, how did it, how did this happen?
Yeah,
What is the cause for it?
yeah,
And I usually steer away from that question, and I tell them that, let's not ponder over it as much, because that is not going to help us in any way. Because whatever happened is happened. Now, even if we understand what I mean, there's a lot of research going on. Let the scientists do that work, let them figure that out. For us, we need to look at what's next for this child, right? And we need to figure out what is the best way to support this child to live in this world. And that is all we will focus on. Because if I try to explore the what cost, the it's more likely than not the blame is going to fall on the mother, because in our culture most of the narratives are around um, the mother's contribution
yeah,
to a child being ill, or like even the gender of the child, or it's all the mom's fault, right? So even though I remember there was some research which quoted the um, um, the prevalence of autism to the father's age.
yeah,
Like the older the father, you're more likely to have a child with autism. But that's not going to fly in our culture, But anything to do with mothers, we will stick on to that very easily. So so I keep telling them, and but it's very difficult because it's no matter how much I say it, that guilt, that is, you cannot take it out of them, especially from the mother. So that continues to be there, and whatever it is that they do, they continue to feel that guilt. There are a lot of families, once they figure out that the child has autism, a lot of the mothers who quit their successful careers to be at home with the
yeah,
child. There's also another thing that I discourage families from doing, because as Chitra pointed out earlier, when you're working elsewhere, you have one more way of validating your efforts, your contributions to the society, right? Only parenting, that is the only way you are being validated. That is the only contribution you're making, and you're seeking all your validation from that. And as a child with a developmental delay, your child may not show progress as you expected. The
yeah. Yeah, shit.
I'm putting all this effort, I'm not getting the results. And the burden, um, falls on the child actually, even though it was not the child's choice, right? It was the parents' choice to give up their job for, and some parents would even say that, I gave up my job for. I said, don't
Yeah,
do that, and don't say that. Even when you do it, you're more likely to think about it that way, and it'll reflect in your behavior, right? Every now and then it might come out. See, I left my job so that I can take care. It was not something your child asked for, so don't do it. And you will be a better mother if you went outside and worked and came back home, is what I would say. So these are a few things that I can think of right now that parents come to me with,
yeah,
right? So if you think about it, all these insecurities, this guilt, this not being able to be that right mother for the child, all these are thoughts that keeps recurring in these parents, these caregivers, especially the mothers' minds, right? And imagine having depression to add to all this mess. So it just complicates things all the more.
Also, here, Chitra, can you tell us about your experience? How did, I'm sure you must have also sacrificed certain things. It might, like you mentioned, the whole journey with your child was also a roller coaster. How did you overcome it? How do you look at it?
Uh, so the truth is, I haven't sacrificed anything like that because I was already not working. So I didn't actually like leave a job and stuff like that. But yes, what Dr. Bindya said also, there were points where I too have told my son, like, see, I'm not going to work because I have to take care of you. But at a later stage, I actually picked up a career in this space only. But and that has become a very necessary part of my own survival as a thing, as a person. But yes, some things I have sacrificed. Like, for example, any other mother may, like, if okay, you're working in a space, you want to go for that movie, you can just walk out and go. But I can't. Like, for me, everything I need to plan way ahead. And even if you're going for a vacation, for example, it's like the vacation is not a relaxed time. So some ways I am sacrificing some things there, but then you also eventually learn how to balance some things. Like, okay, some things you can't, you have to sacrifice, but there are go arounds and walk arounds and like jugaad kind of things which you do so that you can survive. But I really can't think of major things that I've sacrificed because maybe I've been a little selfish that
But how do
there are
you,
things like I like to
emotionally,
do and I continue to do. Sorry. Yeah.
I mean, how do you deal with it? Because as a parent, I mean, you expect that, oh, my child is going to do this at a certain age. Oh, this is your child victory becomes your victory. You identify, our parents say, oh, my child did this. I'm so happy. They want to be identified. And that's a very different journey with the neurodivergent children, even in our families and societies. How do you deal with it? Because as a parent, do you think that society, when your child is growing up, does the same sort of thing comes to you from society as the same experience that a neurotypical child's parent might have?
Yeah. So I have had a little bit of a different experience. I think when my son was younger, I was not too bothered about like the comparisons, kind of. I was not, I don't know, maybe I was in my own world and kind of doing things with him, for him, and stuff like that. I hardly ever compared. But as he's grown,
Oh shit.
then the reverse comparison also sometimes comes in terms of, okay, like there's this person who's doing this thing. I sometimes wonder, why can't my son also do something like that? But then I just take a moment and I realize, no, but he's doing a whole lot of other things which that person is not doing. But when he was younger, I've not compared so much. Like, I don't know, I don't know, maybe I am an anomaly in that sense, but I've not compared because uh, I don't know why also. If you ask me why, I really don't know, but that comparison never happened. I think we were already walking a lonely path in, like, in many ways, like what we were always taking a path which was less traveled, so we kind of stood out in many ways. So maybe that's why also that comparison never, because there weren't many people on that path.
Yeah.
So the comparison never came into the picture. But yeah, now sometimes I do, and I also realize that how difficult it must be for parents of younger children, because there's a whole lot of celebration that happens of like my child is doing this and this child has done this, which has, it is good, I'm not saying it's not good, but it puts a whole lot of pressure on other parents, because then you are, okay, that child is doing this, let me try this, and maybe your child
Exactly.
can't do it or is not interested, but that gets sidelined or suppressed, and the whole comparison thing comes in. So I do realize there's a lot of pressure that comes into being part of parent groups where all these comparisons occur. So I groups where I am, I try to advocate that can we also talk about the difficulties that somebody is facing, or the things that you failed at, like as a mother, like it's not like we are all succeeding all the time. There are places where we have fumbled, we have fallen. Can we also talk about all those? And I talk about areas where I have struggled, I continue to struggle, I have fallen, so that at least seeing me talk, somebody else will, yeah.
Because
And
part of
also the,
accepting it.
yeah, accepting it, because also like there is a huge pressure on my son in terms of like, because he writes and stuff like that, he is doing everything is perfect with him, like, so then I do try to point out every time that he has huge struggles in his day-to-day thing. So that is actually exactly indicative of the spiky profile that an autistic individual has. So I always make it a point to highlight that there are huge difficulties he faces. He is not independent in terms of his day-to-day things, like he's independent in his thoughts. So please see it in the
Understandable.
full perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Also, again, our question to both of you, one of the fears that people in society in general have, that autistic people will not be able to survive alone as an adult. Does it, can they not be able to survive? How is the future ahead for them? If you could tell us about that as well.
So that continues to be a very um, a question that needs to be answered. Now, having said that, I have a lot of families who would come to me. Maybe the child is 4 or 5, and they're very concerned, right? He's not talking, so he's not doing this, he's not doing that. Shouldn't he be doing it by now? How will he live? How will he survive? Is what they ask, right? So one thing I point out to them is your child is 4 right now, right? And you're already thinking about a 35-year-old child of yours, right? And a 4-year-old child that you're seeing right now is definitely not going to be the 35-year-old, right? There is another 30 more years for the child to get there. So when we talk about what will my child do when he grows up, most of the families are thinking that.
Yeah.
When they come to me, their anxiety is that if he does not talk now, how will he? But you need to understand that he's not talking now. He'll probably talk in another 2 years, or he'll probably talk in another 4 years, or if he doesn't talk, he'll find another way of communicating in another few years. So most families look at this 4-year-old as a 35-year-old. And I need to show them that, see, in the last 4 years, how far he has come. So that same thing will happen, because there's only one way to go, which is up. The development will keep on happening, and the progress will continue to happen. So that is one thing I have to convince families, right? So we can only solve for the problems that we have right now, or the concerns that we have right now, or the struggles that we have right now. We don't know what the nature of the struggles will be, let alone 5 years down the lane. We don't know what the nature of struggles would be like next week,
Yeah.
because children develop and children surprise you. They'll just turn around and start doing things in a moment when you're least expecting
Mm.
it, right? Some skills that you have been trying to work on for a very long time, and then you just see the child just starts doing it, right? Toilet training and all are one of them, right? The parents spend so many years working on it, and one fine day they just start doing it. So there are a lot of surprises that they give us in their developmental process. Now, coming back to your original question. Now, this is about parents who are young parents who are
Yeah.
thinking, who are worrying about an older child. But for parents who are older, this seems to be a problem that is still not tackled, most effectively. We know a lot of families who are getting together, designing programs like supportive, supportive group living kind of spaces. Um, there are a lot of different people, different groups of people who are doing, and mostly groups of parents who are doing different initiatives in different parts of India. They're all trying to set up something more sustainable for their children after them, because they're always concerned
Yeah.
about what after them. But then again, we've also realized that a group living or what we refer to as, a segregated living, where a segregated and congregated living. So they are remote from the mainstream community, and they're living with people who are like them in a space. That is probably not the most sustainable way of doing it,
Mm.
right? Because then it becomes institutional care, and then there are paid people to take care of them, and sometimes there's a lot of abuse that can happen there. So we're seeing that, those kinds of issues unfold. So we're still looking for more sustainable, more inclusive ways of planning for them, so that they also live meaningful and more productive lives as adults and senior citizens and all that. But we still don't have a one size fits all answer for it. But although there are a lot of efforts, initiatives being happening in different parts of India. Chitra, you can also add to the
So
different
I
projects that
don't
you know
have
about it.
much to add, but I also totally agree with what Dr. Bindya said about the segregated and congregated. So such kind of residential settings, there are a lot mushrooming across the country, and what is also scary is that there are no what do I call, no rules or like those kind of things set out, guidelines which need to be followed for. So anybody can just one
Mm.
day decide, I'm going to set up, and they can do it, and there's
No
nobody
legal
overseeing
structure
it,
to it. Yeah.
yeah, there's nothing like that. And so what also happens is when abuse happens, people
Mm.
get away with it. And there are a lot of situations that have happened like that. So people do get away with it. And in many ways, that also kind of builds this whole negative image about the community as such, that and adds to the stigma
Mm.
associated, that okay, for example, autism is this huge dangerous space to be in, and if you have a child with autism, your life is lost, and all sorts of things. There are all sorts of things which get shared across, and uh, having these centers don't help in any way, because again, they're all kept away from mainstream society. So
Mm.
what are we in effect doing? We are actually
Segregate.
not, yeah, not creating awareness. So what is hidden from the eye, nobody has any clue that somebody like this exists. So it's what our previous generations did, we are just repeating, but in a very
Systematic. I know.
lot of like most of these places have these CCTV cameras, and so you can keep a check on your child that there is no abuse. But a simple question would be, how difficult is it to turn off a CCTV camera? Abuse the child, nobody is going to be any wiser, right? So these kind of settings don't actually offer solutions which are sustainable and which are actually uh, in tandem with the right to a full life
Yeah.
that any human
Human
being
dignity
has.
as well.
Yeah, any human being has. But what are the alternatives? Well, no answers there. But unless we acknowledge that the present systems are not good enough for the community, nobody is even going to put on their thinking hats and think, "Ki,
For the
what else
solution.
can we do?" Or what, or even ask them, what would you like How would you like
Mm.
to uh, be like? What kind of a
Yeah.
setup would you like to live in? And yeah, and it's also connected to the whole self advocate. Like there is no advocacy as such
Mm.
within the community that is happening. So it's most oftentimes it's a funny thing. The caregiver is traumatized and vilified, but later on the caregiver takes total control and kind of decides or takes decisions for the individual. So it's a funny kind of thing, and I don't have solutions, but I just would say like we all need to think and be open to thinking along newer ways, like because I'm sure there are solutions out there. It's just that we are not seeing, we are not thinking, and perhaps it also comes from the space that we are not seeing them as ourselves.
Yeah. I mean,
We're
the
not
stigma is
seeing them.
still the major problem
Yeah,
that we
so
have.
somewhere we are not seeing them as equal as ourselves, and that is why we are restricting our
Hmm.
thinking. Because if we see them as ourselves, what would we do? We would think like, what would I want to do? And we would think likewise for this
Yeah.
person also. But that is not happening. So no easy answers there, but hopefully, yes, we will find some
So,
answers.
hopefully someday. The last thing that we would end with, how are there any resources for new mothers, especially who are becoming parents of autistic children, to get access to understand this? If you have come across that helps them, or what can help them? Because mostly it's the new
Um,
mothers who take up to abandon it, who don't understand, and out of the fear they abandon the children or they kill them. So if there are any resources that could help them during this time.
Bindi, you want to answer that? Okay. So there are a lot of resources, but it's actually it's the reverse from where what I had faced when my son was diagnosed, where there was not many resources.
Yeah.
Now there's a glut, and sifting through that can be a huge issue as well. And here I would like to mention that we do run a small we call it an orientation or something like that. And it is neuroaffirmative. And we try to fill in that space that Dr. Bindya was talking about. Like the diagnosis happens, and the parent
Debriefing
has to
doesn't
start
happen.
the
Yeah.
intervention. So in between that, there is no counseling. There is no setup like a counseling that is there in, and no effort to help the parent to understand what this is all about. So we try to fill in that space. We help the parents to, we run a short thing. We do it both online and offline, Dr. Bindya and myself. And we also have autistic people involved in the whole process because we like strongly believe that people with lived experiences need to be part of anything that we talk about. And we help parents to understand what autism is all about, and some of the critical areas that you need to be aware of as a parent, like communication or the sensory struggles, and also highlight that what behaviors are not
Hmm.
kind of thing, to look deeper into any behavior, because most often parents initially are told, okay, you need to remedy these
Yeah.
behaviors and then the child can be mainstreamed. But it's not as easy as it sounds, and it's not often doable also. So, and also to give them that hope that yes, it is going to be a difficult journey. I'm not saying it's not a difficult journey, but there are joys, and uh, you can always figure out ways, and there are so many of us on the same path. So you have
They're
company,
not
you
alone.
have people who can support you and guide you, and you're not alone on this journey. So those kind of, so we try to do it over a set of 6 sessions, and we do it offline and online. And so that is one resource that I can like
Thank you so
truly,
much for
yeah,
sharing
vouch
this.
for. But otherwise, online there are resources, but I cannot honestly pick up one and
Mm.
say like this is, because then it
Yeah.
would be like I'm promoting
Yeah.
something. So I really don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Thank you
do
for
you want
sharing this with us.
that? Yeah.
To add to what Chitra said, I think we need to look at early intervention a little differently from what is currently happening. And I think in the West also that switch in narrative has started to happen. When we diagnose a child with a neurodivergent condition, we immediately talk about getting the child to therapies and interventions. And there the whole idea is when we get them to therapy or intervention, this child's early years, we can put in as much stimulation as possible, and a lot of things can be recovered in that time. But then there's a lot of burden on this child. And what is happening is also the missing piece is that there is nothing happening with the families.
Mm.
It's only on the child, right? And just because the focus is all on the child, the family is also thinking that all this therapy will make it better, right? And you don't necessarily see that change because the child is still growing. The child needs a lot
Mm.
more time to respond to these interventions, so that you might not see the change or the improvement happen during that time. So this is also frustrating the parents. So instead, what we've seen is like in Europe and all, they've started doing early intervention as a combination of both therapy for child and therapy for parents.
Mm.
And when they're talking about therapy for parents, they're looking at more of acceptance and commitment therapy for parents. So that is the gist of it. Like,
Mm.
the parent has to accept the condition
Mm.
and you need to work around that. If you still hold on to the belief that, okay, I have this child, but I can change this child and I can make the child look like a typical child, then you're never going to be satisfied. I mean, you will struggle throughout this journey.
Mm.
But acceptance is the key, like if you can see the calmness with which Chitra is speaking, and that is because she had got to that level of acceptance pretty early on in her son's development. Now, I understand it's not that all parents can get to that
Mm.
point at the same time. Each parent, it's a different journey, right? And I also believe that every parent grows along with their child as a parent. So a parent of a 2-year-old will be very different from a parent of a 6-year-old, very different from a parent of a 10-year-old or a 15-year-old. But just because I have a parent who of a 15-year-old who's realized that, who's come to terms
Yeah.
with the fact, I cannot rush a parent of a 2-year-old to get to that point. I have to give them that space. They have to slowly develop, understand. They have to accept it and come to
Mm.
terms with it. I cannot force it as a
Professional.
professional, right? So we'll have to give them the time. So, but this kind of therapy for the parents or training for the parents. So ours is a course that we are offering. We're calling it a course because we are providing a lot of information on autism, and we are providing information on how, as a parent, you can respond to
Yeah.
this child. We are not saying
There's
change
a
how your child
training
responds.
for
We are
both.
saying
Yeah.
yes. So we are saying you change the way you respond to the child.
Mm.
Don't make the child change the way and make him respond a certain way. So that is the focus of our course, and we are doing it so that the parents' mental health and the child's mental health can be protected through this
Yeah.
through this intervention.
Journey
That is
throughout.
our.
Thank you. Thank you so much for both of you for taking out the time and sharing such insightful information and your experiences with us. Thank you.